Hello. In this video clip, we're looking at clause 715 of ISO 9001, monitoring and measuring resources. It's in two parts, as you can see. Part one is general and part two is all about traceability and more for those companies who use calibration equipment or calibrated equipment. So firstly, let's look at the general requirements. The organization shall determine and provide the resources needed to ensure valid and reliable results when monitoring or measuring is used to verify the conformity of products and services to requirements. Now, there's a mouthful there, okay? So it's just saying that, first of all, you have to identify what has to be monitored and measured. And that's something we look at later on in clause 8 when we're looking at operations. But largely, I'll give you an example based on our own experience. Our own firm is quite a small consultancy firm, so our monitoring and measuring is through our reporting systems. So when we engage with a client, there's usually a report to summarize and capture what's being addressed during the engagement. And we then have that on file for review. So that reporting it gives us the opportunity to monitor the quality of the reports, what has been covered at each client engagement, and how we're going to proceed and so on. It also gives you an opportunity for our regular management meetings where we use that reporting mechanism to identify issues so that each consultant would be reporting to the managing partner and so on of issues and experiences along the way. So for us, our reporting system within our client engagements allows us to have adequate monitoring and measuring above all of our projects. However, if you're a small manufacturing operator, you may have computer equipment which is producing reports because the computer, maybe through sensors on a conveyor belt and everything else, is monitoring. One of our clients in the print sector, for example, they would have a count on the machine where 1 in every 1,000 is pushed out for review. So in a large run of 20 or maybe 100,000 brochures or leaflets, the printer has the opportunity to pull 1 in 1,000 to check for specification requirements and so on. Other companies we work with would have computer equipment monitoring processes and keeping an eye on the parameters so that whenever something falls outside of those parameters, it deviates from what's expected, it produces a report, and that report then can be evaluated afterwards. The criteria has a few further specifications. So the organization shall ensure that the resources provided, A, are suitable for the specific type of monitoring and measurement activities being undertaken. So looking at that by itself, the reporting that I referenced in our own organization satisfies that. Likewise, the more technical computer controlled processes will have the obvious reporting based on those digital networks. Point B is the resources provided are maintained to ensure their continuing fitness for their purpose. So our own example is probably not the best for explaining this particular one, but I think it's self-explanatory to a degree. And those monitoring resources that are applied in a manufacturing facility, for example, would be subject to technological improvements and change and trends towards better technology to do more things. Better monitoring maybe is available now than was before. A number of companies we work with in the logistics arena would carry out services such as ambient and temperature controlled storage. Monitoring of those particular systems is critical. So lastly then, the organization shall retain appropriate documented information as evidence of fitness for purpose of the monitoring and measuring resources. Well, most examples that we see, for example, one of our customers is a commercial laundry business, and they would have a lot of computer controlled machinery, but from their operations office, through one computer dashboard, the operatives and supervisors are able to monitor all of the machines that are being used in the facility. So they would have 20 large commercial washing machines filled by chute, and their clients would be interested, for example, in knowing and having validations available that the temperature of the water reached a certain point and was sustained for a particular period of time. So, for example, it might be a requirement for an overall wash, for overalls to be washed at 60 degrees for 20 minutes with a percentage of a certain chemical in for detergents and antibacterial purposes. So, having those records on file that the machines reached that temperature for that period of time, also having those controls in place to measure and to actually keep a record of the chemicals that were used, the cleaning agents that were used in the wash. That's vital information when it comes to inspection and validations after the fact. So for your own consideration will be, how are you going to monitor things? What kind of records do you need to keep to demonstrate that your products and services are meeting the requirements throughout the processes? And typically in a standard operation where you have between 5 and 10 steps to a process, there may be one or two critical steps there where it's appropriate and maybe necessary to take a measure and record that measure for future reference. Let's move on to part 2, measurement traceability. There's an important aspect to this that has to be understood. Our own experience early on with auditing and consulting with companies, for example, where they have weigh bridges, where they have clean room technology, where they have very tight tolerances for defects. There's an expectation in the market that very good monitoring is in place and measurement traceability is in place. In particular, I want to mention a legal requirement. There's an EU directive called the Measuring Instruments Directive, and it is European law. In Irish law, it's been enacted as a statutory instrument. I think it's number 2 of 2018, the Legal Metrology European Conformity Assessment of Measuring Instruments Regulations of 2018. So for those who have weigh bridges or any measuring instruments which require calibration, it's the calibration element that comes under the Measuring Instruments Directive. And calibration in most cases will be mandatory and will have set periods for frequency. So keep that in mind. Just one point on that before we finish is, for a cert to be valid, there are a number of criteria which needs to be determined, which includes the plus or minus success of the testing mechanism. So this is important. Those who are familiar with this kind of requirement will completely understand what it is I'm mentioning. For those, if it doesn't make sense to you, well, then it doesn't apply. Let's look at the criteria in detail. When measurement traceability is a requirement, that's the traceability element, or is considered by the organization to be an essential part of providing confidence in the validity of measurement results, measuring equipment shall be A, calibrated or verified, or both, at specific intervals or prior to use, against measurement standards traceable to international or national measurement standards. When no such standards exist, the basis used for calibration or verification shall be retained as documented information. B, identified in order to determine their status. And C, safeguarded from adjustments, damage or deterioration that would invalidate the calibration status and subsequent measurement results. Basic weighing scales is very hard to adjust. Calibrating measuring instruments, it can be quite a technical exercise. Where mandatory calibration is a requirement, typically the calibration adjustment mechanisms are sealed, and sometimes sealed with a wax covering so that any tampering will be evident. Okay. Lastly, in this particular clause, the organisation shall determine if the validity of previous measurement results has been adversely affected when measuring equipment is found to be unfit for its intended purpose, and shall take appropriate action as necessary. I think that's a direct it kind of speaks for itself in many ways, because if you discover, for example, in today that your weighing scales is off, you're obliged under this requirement to carry out an investigation to discover if the weighing scales has been off for a period of time, for how long, and how far back do you need to go to establish the validity and the accuracy of the measurement. So all of this kept in mind, I suppose, monitoring and measuring resources. It's very specific to every organization. Each organization will have its own particular requirements. For those that are operating in environments where there are a lot of technical controls and a lot of ability to take measurements through digital and technical means, you're probably working in an area where it's also important to your customer that you keep good records. And it's good records and good record keeping is what your auditor is going to expect at certification time. Okay, thank you very much for watching. Please get in touch via the chat box on the website if there's any need for further guidance or explanation. Other than that, have a good one. Take care.